And that's the first time in Cape Town at least. So there's a high-level support for that, for the safety and security, and it integrates various things, technology, it integrates the various law enforcement agencies, Metro Police, law enforcement, and SAPs, as well as private security and community volunteers, those community guardians or facility guardians that are coming from within the community. So people taking ownership of spaces and are supported. It's the first time, it's a 24/7 model, and it's a public sector and community-driven model, which is fundamentally different to a city improvement district model that looks primarily at top-ups of and private security models. We're trying to work at a workable model that can be managed between public sector and the community itself. So we would like to call it the communalization of spaces rather than the privatization of spaces. In reality, it looks like that. It's a square, you could say it from planning terms, it's a kids of part. There's a couple of public buildings, income-generating building, and a public square. You can see the variety of things. Some of the basic elements is that you have to have a flexible and on-site solution with local financial contribution to it. You need to have a number of skills, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's from property management to organizational development to operational maintenance to administration to landscaping to business development, because you want to initiate and support those local entrepreneurs that provide you with rental income in an area and that activate spaces. But also on a very localized level, you need to go into each, and I think the Emton is a good example. On the one hand side, you've got your principles, your policy, but it gets unstuck when you come to a very localized. So for each localized area, you have to develop a particular permutation of that. You need that buy-in of the community leadership, and you need to have different services. And again, it's that public sector and community integration that I spoke about. On a one particular element, it looks, for instance, a solution for the informal traders around the transport interchange. And you can see the pride of how people are taking that. And that building, for instance, as you can see, it is paying for itself. It's one of those active boxes where through the rental income of the traders, we are able to basically employ the so-called general worker. That's a facility manager within that area. There are facility guardians, and an NGO provides services. In this place, business place Kailicha, for those traders sitting right underneath them. There's a linkage to a private security company because that is a business which come out on call, that are paid out of the project, and there's facility guardians that look after it during the day. It's just one of those elements. I would like to hand over to Iris.
Okay, so research. So we see two sides to research within VPUU. The first side is about, or one of the sides is about sharing lessons learned and the knowledge and experience that we've gained through the implementation of the program. And we see that largely through the establishment of a center of excellence that we intend to set up in the next few years, and that we see as a hub for crime prevention. But our focus today on the other side of research, which is about measuring progress and impact of the program in improving the quality of life of residents. And so I think Michael and all of my colleagues have highlighted it already today, that although we are called VPUU, which is violence prevention, and although, of course, safety as a public good is the main focus of the program, we have a broader scope, which is quality of life improvement. And so we consider that in order to have an impact in preventing or reducing violence, a multidimensional and holistic approach is needed. And so we see the improvement of quality of life as a prerequisite to prevent violence in a sustainable way. So I will talk today about the idea of a quality of life index as an example of ongoing monitoring and evaluation. And I wanted to talk about the impact assessment, which is currently conducted in partnership with UCT and the province and a range of universities, but Tracy and Lydia already talked quite a bit about it, and so I won't go there. So I will basically focus around ongoing monitoring and evaluation and quality of life measurement. So when it comes to measuring improvement in quality of life, we've been working on developing quality of life indicators, and this very much reflects the multidimensional nature of the VPUU approach, and they directly link to the 4 components of the VPUU strategies that we've all been talking about today, being prevention, cohesion, protection, and research. And so these are around 6 main desired outcomes, being the life cycle approach, from early child development to business support, safety as a public good, access to justice, local initiatives to prevent crime, security of tenure, disaster risk mitigation, active participation of local leadership and community members, infrastructure development, access to basic services, and the focus on the public realm, partnerships in development, and the setup of sustainable maintenance and management system, and impact measurement and knowledge sharing and dissemination. So looking at these 6 main desired outcomes, we looked at key quality of life indicators and at how we could develop an index which would enable us to measure in a consistent way progress in quality of life across different areas within the program, but also with the option to apply this index to a diversity of areas. And so here are 2 examples around access to water and safety and security. So the idea would be to have a 1 to 5 point scale, where 1 is your starting point or our starting point, 5 reflects the program's objectives, and 3 reflects national standards where applicable. And so the idea is, or the intention of the index is not to be about numbers and quantitative aspects only, but it's also intending to reflect on sustainability and more qualitative aspects. So if we take the example of access to water, for instance, in an informal settlement, it wouldn't be only about your number of taps or your number of toilets, but it would be about how well maintained these taps and toilets are, and how long does it take to repair a broken tap or broken toilet. And it's also about what do people think, what are the satisfaction levels within the community. So that's what we're trying to do. And in more practical terms, that's an example of how the index could be used. Just very simply, if we take 4 indicators, so say if 50% of your dwellings in a specific settlement are within 50 meters of a tap, you would score a 3. If 35% of broken taps take less than a week to get repaired, you would score a 2. If there is at least 1 working tap in each 25 families, you would score a 3. And say if 75% of households are satisfied with the condition of taps, you would score a 4. So here, for instance, around access to water, you would score 12 over 20. So we're still at a conceptual stage, and if there are any suggestions in the room, they are very welcome. So that's a practical example of how of a system which we set up and which aim to monitor working conditions of water taps and toilets in informal settlements. So that's Monroe BC Park, which some of my colleagues already mentioned. And the way it works is that trained local residents who are in charge of maintaining and repairing taps and toilets go and conduct a full inventory of all taps and toilets on a weekly basis. And this has been allowing us to track on a weekly basis to monitor working conditions, response time to repair broken taps and toilets, and basically assess how many working taps and toilets are available for the community. So that's tracking your ratio, how many working taps or toilets for how many number of households. And all of the taps and toilets have been mapped into GIS, so it's been also allowing us to generate weekly maps, which are then used within the local operation and maintenance team to identify problems areas and prioritize, organize their work. And my last item, since I won't go through the RDRC project, is another practical example of how perceptions are being collected within the communities where we intervene. So we've got trained local field workers that go to all our safe node area and conduct a certain number of interviews on a monthly basis. And they collect information around satisfaction levels around public infrastructure and public services, perceptions around security of tenure and safety in more general terms. And so the graph at the bottom is showing an example of progress on safety ratings in Harare Safe Node area in Kalicha, where people are asked how safe they feel on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is your worst, I feel completely unsafe, 5 is your best, and 3 is, even though it's not completely safe, the situation has become acceptable. So even though perceptions are extremely subjective, both on the fieldworker side and on the respondent side, we can see here an incremental improvement on how safe people feel in Harare. And if one had to take these scores and compare them to an area where the program is not as well established, the scores tend to be lower. So yeah, I think I will stop here. In a nutshell, an overview on M&E within VPUU.
Thank you. It's the last time that you will see me. There's the mic in front of me, so I got the opportunity to close. What we have tried to show is the sort of the matrix or the strategy of VPUU. So that's the research partnership. So I should probably put that one up. It's the methodology, the methodology as well as the matrix and strategy of VPUU. With the prevention element that Chris went into, the life cycle approach of the World Health Organization. It's around the community mobilization and that cohesion of things, which we gave a very detailed example of the Mtunjeni and how a strategy needs to be applied in a very localized context, in a very unformalized context with a lot of challenges there, because there's very little legislation, but we're sort of trying and define legislation here also with the city together. We spoke about operational maintenance on an area level, and one of the things, for instance, yesterday we had the sod turning of the building of a library in Kuyasa, and one of the things that the director for libraries said, for instance, that the Harare Library, which is in the center of this picture here, which actually is a house of learning, over the last 3 years didn't have a single incident of vandalism. And that we would really like to contribute to that very detailed and enhanced work with VPUU. In comparison, the other library or another library in Kailicha had for this year only 10 burglaries already. So flat screens come in and go out, morning in, evening out. Nyanga, same exercise. And that has been able, through that community contract and that community cohesion, to basically prevent that. Iris has given the examples of the knowledge management and how we try to do that, and Tracy spoke about that violence observatory or safety observatory, which we would like to be part of. In terms of formal areas, and you could see that we want to work in formal and in informal areas. It's really about making formal areas sustainable and manageable, and management on an area scale in so-called townships. And in the informal settlements, we really try to include people into the society. And it has to do a lot with security of tenure. It's often not seen as crime prevention, but just imagine if you didn't have a security of tenure, what a big step that is actually for in terms of safety and feeling safe and feeling included into a community. So it's a lot about communication, negotiation with partners, transforming off spaces and lifestyles. I've spoken about, or we've spoken about, the positively occupying perceived dangerous spaces and the improvement of quality of life. Thank you very much to my team, and back to the chairperson.
Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of food for thought in these very rich presentations. And I think there's quite a lot of complexity here, and there's a lot of thought that's gone into the design of the VPUU approach. So we have about 20 minutes before we break for lunch, so I'd like to open the floor for any questions or comments, and I'll sort of collect a few questions and comments, then I'll hand back to the respective people from VPUU to respond. So, any questions or comments? Gideon.
Firstly, from our side, also thank you for every time we listen to a presentation from VPUU. It's a bit of a training session as well. So we really appreciate what you've shared with us again. I have a number of comments, but let me just make the one first, and kind of, Chris, it's about what you were speaking about, income generating, or let's say economic activities. And you know, from a perspective of government, when we look at, I wonder how many workshops and so we had when when the shebeens were created. You know, the shebeens were created, I believe, in a response to the demand of the community. The same with spaza shops. You know, there was no forums and so on when these things were created. And government tend to spend a lot of money on this concept of creating entrepreneurs. Yet, you know, entrepreneurs are not a very, let's say, they're not easy to come by, irrespective of where you go, which community, which country or what the income level. So I'm just looking at you and saying, and that's what I would put to the panel to some extent also, my interpretation is that with the, for instance, the shebeens and the spaza shops, the bigger companies, whether it was a deliberate act or whatever, I'm not sure, but they were successful in negotiating the barriers to trading. Now, when we go to the shebeens, what did they do? They actually gave a fridge. They delivered at your doorstep because they know people don't have cards. They give you 30 days cash free. You take the stock, you sell, and then you pay us back. You understand? So through going past the barriers to trade, they've actually created this industry. Same with the spaza shop. So I'm just, because as long as government must fund these activities, I don't think it's going to be viable. I don't think, you understand, we need to really cross that divide from where it's actually viable and economic sustainable just from, because it's responding to the needs of the community. And that's again, just in summary there, when we look at the work of, for instance, the safety lab, you know, the kids are coming to the movie, they don't need to be collected with buses, and you understand, they just respond. Yet when you drive through that area, and thanks to VPUU, I've driven through the area a few times, but I've never seen a DVD shop there, or you understand, whether we could have the spaza shop selling DVDs, could we negotiate could we remove those barriers to trading? Is that viable? Could government go and negotiate with Sterkirik or the royalties or whatever the case may be to do that? What is the kind of, you understand, lessons that you've learned in that regard?
Thanks, Gideon. Next on my list I have Carl.
Thanks very much, Guy. Thanks for the presentation, VPUU team. Very interesting and very rich. Two quick questions around the water tap sites, and if you have worked at all with the isiBindi or come into contact with the isiBindi project of social development, and if you think there's might be potential to work with them more, the child and youth care workers around that space, just interested if you've had any contact with them. And then secondly, in relation to preventing violence prevention, if you could share more your outcomes around that, your intended outcomes, and the indicators that you're using for preventing violence, for knowing whether you are achieving the prevention of violence. Just talk a bit more about that.
Thanks,
specifically
Carl.
in relation to preventing violence.
Sure. But John and then Ian.
Gideon, just a quick comment. You were saying the lack of entrepreneurs. I think we've got an incredible amount of entrepreneurs in this country. It's just finding legal entrepreneurs that are willing to pay tax. That's the question. I can take you to a number of places in Kailicha where you can get DVDs, not legal DVDs though. You know, that's the issue. Yeah. As Carl has echoed, really interesting, rich presentation. But Kai, I wanted to ask specifically, from my own experience, but when you speak to a lot of NGOs and CBOs about community consultation, they'll often moan about the role of disruptors. You know, that you'll go into a meeting and you find out that there are people who are actively then working against you, and the mixed agendas and the politicking and the role of certain organizations that I'm not going to name, especially in Khayelitsha. You know, how much did you find that? How easy was it to kind of navigate? And I'm hoping you're going to say it was extremely difficult because you made it all look way too easy.
Thanks, Jono. Ian.
Okay, my question, comment and question in some ways relates to Carl's question around evidence of violence prevention. But Michael, you mentioned 37% reduction in murder. For what area is that? How is that measured, and to what extent can you attribute that to the VPUU infrastructure and your programming? But coming more specifically to the M&E and that it's still in a conceptual stage, my one comment would be start measuring. Anytime you try to conduct program evaluation, the evaluator will look for what data is available and how far back does it go. Once you start measuring, you will quickly learn everything that you're doing wrong and correct along the way. I can speak from experience. There is no other way but to start. It is, in a way, and I don't mean to be too critical, but a bit shocking that you haven't started real M&E yet, and you're such a big organization, at least compared to the other sort of community-based NGOs that are working here that are trying to answer these questions and need to answer. So I think it's high time that you started to really implement this notion of the observatory and or, what did you say, best practice?
Center of Excellence.
Yeah, Center of Excellence.